These days, I must admit, cider judging is very difficult because all the ciders are very good, and to try and pick the best one is a very difficult and sometimes even a little bit subjective.
Hello, my name is Rio Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world.
Hip, hip, hooray!
Bringing us into episode 442 of Cider Chat, talking about cider judging and how it has become more difficult because the ciders are getting better. I just love that. You know, to hear this from someone, and this someone happens to be Bob Cork, who has been in the cider industry for 40 years. He is a cider consultant. He's basically semi-retired from the Showering Cider Mill in Shepton, Mallet. But he gave me a wonderful, wonderful tour when I visited this last October as I was preparing for the upcoming Totally Cider Tour. And he's going to be our featured guest. So you are in for a treat because he has a certain eye on the category. So I'm going to be talking about that actual interview and that visit coming up in this podcast. But I just want to really invite you, if this is your first time tuning in, to make sure that you hit the follow button wherever you are. We are probably there too. And in the archives, you're going to find everything from cider making tips for amateurs to professionals to orchard care to traveling about around the world, because there's been over 20 plus countries, and that doesn't even include the US of A, being covered on the podcast. So it's a cacophony, if you will, of cider fun. So do check that out, and welcome to the podcast if you are new. And as always, hello to all the folks who are regular listeners out there, and certainly a big thank you and tip of the glass to the patrons of this podcast. Cider Chat is listener supported, and one of the ways that people do that is by joining the Cider Chat Patreon page. So there is a link to that. You could Google it, Cider Chat Patreon, or you could hit the donate button at ciderchat.com. Wassail to everyone. I know there's been a lot of different events surrounding that all over the map, celebrating the annual rite of paying homage to the apple tree with an event called Wassailing. And we do have a full-length episode all on how to wassail and kick off your own event. So I will put a link in the show notes to that. But also, this time of year, folks are gearing up for what is known as a CiderCon. This is the annual conference hosted by the American Cider Association, and this year it's going to be taking place in Chicago, February 4th through the 7th. And if you haven't yet, I highly recommend to register and go, because if you are in the trade and you want to network, if you want to find out the most latest info happening, and see how other folks are making cider, or perhaps you're looking for a job, or you're trying to fine-tune some of your skills or get some of those legal issues figured out, this is the place to be. They have a massive trade show there that is taking place during the conference. They also have the Cider Share, which takes place on Wednesday night, and that's where you get to go in. It's kind of like a mini cider fest for all the folks in the industry. So there's a lot of fun to be had. Now, I have a little PSA, public service announcement, if you will. If you received an email on the 10th of January saying, get on the event app. There's an actual app you could have on your phone. It has real-time updates about changes for different schedules, who's going, how to connect. This is the time to do it. And for one, it allows folks like myself to reach out to you. I keep past apps on my phone for past conferences because I'm seeking out different info to research different episodes that we have here on Cider Chat. And of course, we also do the Totally Cider Tour. So it's really in your best interest to sign up for that app. Now, if you're like me and you already have the app on your phone, there is a code that you need to put in, and I'm not going to let it out right now because it is kind of like a coveted code for only those folks who have registered. So I'm going to make the following recommendation. Go to that January 10th email, scroll down to the page where it says don't have the app, go to, and it says eventmobi.com. And then / that last section there, that is your code that you put into your phone to get the app. And I hope it helps, because I was trying to figure it out. Where is the code? I'm not going to be carrying my computer around with me during the actual event. I need to have this on my phone. So do check it out. It's in that email. It doesn't say put in this code, but it's the last section of that actual website address for the app to access CiderCon 2025. So that's my tip there. My other tip is to take a look at the amazing assortment of workshops and tasting panels that they're going to be having in Chicago. And make sure that you do not hesitate to sign up, because without a doubt, those tasting panels are going to be filled up. And one that you don't want to miss is the one featuring the Chilean cider makers and the history of Chile and cider and apple. I hope it isn't filled up by the time you hear this, because Chile is a featured guest country this year at CiderCon. So just think about that. I'm seeing that Edu is coming in from across the sea. I know a lot of UK makers are coming in. I saw a maker coming in from the Netherlands, from Lithuania, everywhere. And of course, the US of A, because this is the American Cider Association. So make sure to register today. Go to ciderassociation.org and use the following promo code, Cider Chat, all one word, 2 capital C's, to get $30 off your registration, which you can then use to go out to eat or to sign up for the Cider Share that Wednesday night. Go to ciderassociation.org. Coming up this August is the Totally Cider Tour to the United Kingdom, and I'm so super stoked for this. If you've been waiting to hear about the tour, because I know that there is a long list of folks on the wait list, it's going to be coming out soon. In fact, you're going to be getting an email probably in the next week or so letting you know when it's going to be released. So that's an early sign up. It first goes to patrons of Cider Chat and then to that wait list. But before we get there, let me just kind of wet your whistle here to get a sense of what this tour is about. We're going to be starting in Bristol, which is a hub in Somerset. There's great cider bars there. We're going to be having cider dinners and all that jazz, 7 nights in the United Kingdom with the Totally Cider Tour. And one of the stops that I'm pretty excited about, because I visited there this past October to get a sense of the area, and that is a town called Weston-super-Mare. Now, folks in the United Kingdom, some of them are like, why are you going there? Well, I'll tell you why I'm going there. Because the sunsets are spectacular. And there's a little place called the Black Cat, which was one of the runner-ups for Canberra's Cider Pub of the Year. That's where Claire Howe and Nick Smith, they're the proprietors. We're going to be hanging out with them that evening after visiting cideries during the day, such as Wilding Cider, who was on last week's episode. We'll meet them in the morning, some other cideries. Then we'll spend the night at Weston-super-Mare, right across the street from the beach, hang out with Nick and Claire, do some tasting, have dinner, be able to see the sunset, and enjoy a little bit of the seaside in the United Kingdom. Because I think to get a sense of a region is not just to have your head in the barrel, so to speak. I mean, that could be a good thing. But you want to come out and really sense, what is it about this region that creates the style of cider, informs the people, and speaks to cider drinkers in this region? And the UK is unique. It's like every region, it has its own unique style. So make sure, if you're coming along on this tour, this is one to definitely bring some hiking boots, because we'll also be heading up to the Malvern Hills, where you could either hang back at the hotel or choose to take a short little hike up to a peak and take in a 360 view of the West Country. And I imagine a couple of us might have some ciders in hand to celebrate that moment. This is just such a unique tour because it's going to be a little bit different from other ones, of course, because we're in the United Kingdom and nobody does it like the UK. They have their own special style, their own special sense of community. I'm really, really stoked to be able to travel there yet again and to share it with a bunch of cider friends. So make sure if you want to check it out, you want to hear about that early registration, get your name in there, send an email today to info@ciderchat.com, put in the subheading Cider Tour and how many folks might be in your party. And for the rest of you already on that list, do expect an email coming out soon, as we will be releasing the full itinerary to you very shortly for the upcoming Totally Cider Tour to the UK, rolling out August 25th through the 31st.
Walking through the orchards.
Up next is our featured conversation with Bob Cork. This was just an amazing day spent at the Showering Mill in Shepton, Mallet, where we will also be visiting on the upcoming Totally Cider Tour to the UK. Actually, this is our first destination that we're heading to, and we're going to get a full tour of the site. And I want to tell you, after doing this tour with Bob, you don't want to miss it. It's the second largest mill in the United Kingdom, and it has such a history of this one family called the Showering. If you haven't heard my conversation with Nick Showering talking about the new cider called the Showering Triple Vintage, I'll put a link in the show notes to that. And during that conversation with Nick, I had actually heard about Bob and said, geez, I really want to be able to talk to this guy. Sounds like he has a wealth of information. And that's exactly what I did. And I want to give you a sense of the scene when I arrived. I came in through the main entrance and I got suited up immediately. They gave me some wonky little sneakers to put on and a safety vest, and I had safety glasses and a baseball cap and one of those fluorescent vests if your car breaks down. So safety is definitely a factor because this is a huge mill. We're looking at tanks that are 130,000 to 200,000 liters. And not just one tank, a number of them. And that doesn't even take into consideration all the tanks that are inside the building. Those are just outside tanks. And it's tiered up on the hillside because as you arrive at the Shepton Mallet scene there, you're coming down the hill and it's at the base of the hill where the mill is. And whew, they are really cranking it up because they actually have other brands too. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to be going into these like walnut covered walls and having a discussion in a conference room. But that's not how it started. First, we climbed up a stairwell and came out into this large office area, one large floor. And in the corner were 4 desks, and that's where the brothers meet. So I was actually able to meet Matthew, Jonathan, and Daniel Showering while there, and we'll have a photo of those guys in the show notes. Then from there, Bob and I headed into a conference room to meet and have our chit-chat, and soon after had to leave because there was drilling outside. I really got the sense of this place starting to fine-tune and build up the infrastructure that felt a little messy, honestly, when I was there. It felt a little run down. But boy, are they changing the game. So we went across the street where the original Showering, I believe he was a shoemaker, had his shoe shop 400 years ago. Sure it doesn't look anything like it, but maybe does because it's a big old stone building. And we went up into a conference room that I think was at one point Francis Showering's office. So a lot of history there. If you don't know these folks and the history with Baby Sham, that Perry, you're in for a treat. So you're getting a little bit of a pasted along conversation with Bob, and after all this, he led me on a tour of the actual mill site itself that we'll also be doing on the upcoming Totally Cider Tour UK edition this coming August. Making this a very good time now to grab a glass and join this chat with Bob Cork of the Showering Cider Mill. You have been doing this for 40 years. I imagine cider might have been part of your everyday life for your family. Is that true growing up? Was cider like a classic drink?
Yes, very much so. I must admit I consumed quite a bit of cider before I actually started making it. It's a drink I've always enjoyed. It's a drink I've always been interested in. And when the opportunity to join a cider making company came up, I started off life doing an apprenticeship as an engineer and came to the Showering's business as an engineer, but very, very quickly decided that cider making was my forte, rather than the engineering that I'd come to do in the beginning. The engineering's always held me in very good stead, because the design of cider-making systems, particularly specialist in pumps and pipes.
Is that mechanical engineering that you were in?
Mainly liquid engineering, yes. So process engineering.
Perfect.
So a perfect background for moving into the technical side of cider making, if you like. So I had all the knowledge of the pumps, pipes, and equipment you need to make cider, tanks and vessels and pressure vessels, etc.
Critical.
And therefore, natural progression to wanting to understand the technical side of cider, to understand the traditional side of cider, to understand the history of cider, and my move into the Showerings business gave me that. Showerings being a family company, and as previously Nick has said, they were very encouraging of their employees to progress. An easy company to get if you were interested in the company's business, to progress within that company, and they actually provided all the support that you needed to progress within your chosen skill set.
Yeah. When you first arrived at the company, was it a job listing? Did you see a poster, or was it in the newspaper, or did somebody say, "Hey Bob, there's a job at the mill," and you remember?
During my apprenticeship in dairy industry, and that was within mainly pipework and process systems within dairy industry. I also did quite a bit of work within brewing industry, moving between those as contractor. And when the opportunity, and I think probably it was word of mouth, that Showerings were actually looking for specialist stainless steel process workers, then that is how I came to be here. I came for an interview, it was taken on, and I started on the 1st of January in 1980.
1980. A couple of years ago.
It's a little while ago now.
My goodness.
And
wow.
It was at a time when the company was transitioning from some of the older style equipment, which involved less stainless steel, to modernising and having more and more stainless steel, and that was one of the roles that I came in to do. But very quickly got into the sort of design of that, and also the actual cider making process itself.
How has the infrastructure of this site changed over time?
The footprint of this site is very similar to what it was then.
Right.
It's changed a few times since then, but it's actually come back to what it is now. When I first came here, across the road in Kilver Court, it used to be the offices for divisions of allied breweries. Francis Showering and Keith Showering had offices across the way, so the actual control of a lot of the bigger business that it was involved with was from this site, and this was always known locally as the Babysham site. It's got an iconic Babysham deer, which was on the roof at the time, and I always remember...
On the mill it was, or across the street?
It used to be on the roof of the mill, and was very much an icon for people travelling this road, normally going to the coast for their holidays. And I remember very much as a child looking out for the Babysham as they drove past.
Of course.
I knew this site was here really from probably about the age of 6.
Oh my goodness. And just so, if you don't know what the Babysham is, it's like a little tiny reindeer.
I believe the closest analogy to it is the Chinese water deer. Is the closest look into the Babysham deer. But the Babysham deer is very much the Babysham deer.
It stands alone.
It's a trademark.
Just know it's a stand-alone. But just to kind of imagine it, and then you look it up, and we'll have a photo in the show notes. Is it across the street now? I'm hoping to get a selfie with it. I'm not sure. Is it? It is beautiful.
Yes, it's across in Kilber Court now.
Fantastic.
I must admit, it's the original one.
Wow.
So it's still the one I probably saw when I was
When you're
6
a
when it
kid,
came
wow.
past. It was taken down off the roof because really it was starting to weather.
Sure.
It's been taken down, it's been renovated.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly enough, during the renovation, the actual blue bow tie that it wears, when they were looking for the colour for it, they looked it up in the archives of colour, and it was actually called Baby Sham Blue.
Oh my goodness! Oh, that's just too adorable.
And that was probably
yeah.
about 4 years ago.
Right. Oh,
that last
Wow.
renovation,
Nice. Nice.
so that it didn't decay
Yeah.
at all, etc. It's been fully renovated, and now it's kept in a more protected
Sure.
position,
Sure.
out of the main weather. Still
Right.
outside, but out of the winds and rains.
Right. And people are able to go over and visit. It's a garden, and you could get some tea.
Visiting the iconic Baby Sham Gardens is what it's doing.
It is a must do when one comes through Shepton Mallet. Maybe you were seeing your future there. You know, who knew? You know, sometimes our paths lead to the point, and we're exactly where we're supposed to be. You started working here. You said the footprint is the same.
This site grew up really around the Baby Sham brand.
Mm-hmm.
It was built to produce Baby Sham. The Showerings brothers, who brought Baby Sham to market back in the 90s, invested a lot of money here, grew a large factory, and because of the popularity of Baby Sham, it took quite a time for this site to catch up with the production. So
Yes.
basically, equipment was coming in and being used even before some of the buildings were finished. So that was the success of Baby Sham in those days. As the company grew, the brothers, who were cider makers at heart, also made cider here. They incorporated some local brands, Coates and Gamer Cider Company, which is up in Norfolk, were all acquired by Showerings.
Family. Yeah.
And Showerings had quite a large business of both cider, Baby Sham, and a few soft drinks as well that they made. And it wasn't all done on this site, but all the Baby Sham has always been made here, and all the ciders, or majority of the ciders, I should say, have been made on this site. And over the years, more and more different brands have been brought into this site for production. As the site's been developed, and it was modernised during the 1980s all the way through to, and is now a large bottling facility, canning facility. We also keg here, but our main skill set is making cider.
And is Baby Sham currently being made here?
Baby Sham is made here, yes.
Made here, yes.
When I first joined, Baby Sham was the main production here.
Yeah.
So I basically cut my teeth on Baby Sham and the other cider brands that were available there.
Yeah.
And they were the Allied breweries brands of Old English.
Yes, yes. So what's interesting from, I'm US based, we're in the UK, is to see how the evolution of cider has changed over the years and how it's gone in one direction. From my vantage point, a little bit shifting back to more traditional methods, or a palate, if you will. From your vantage point, because 40 years where the market was in 1980 feels a bit different where the market is in 2024. But is that true? What are the main changes that you've seen?
I think since I joined the business in 1980, the market for cider has moved.
In what direction?
To increase.
Okay, good news. We love that.
And there are some sides to that statement. But if we go back to the sort of 80s, we've seen some designer ciders start to arrive on the market.
What do you mean by designer ciders?
Ciders that were done by design and appealed particularly to the younger generation. There became a culture, for instance, of drinking from a bottle, and you've seen quite a number of ciders actually join in that. Obviously, as life moved on, the drinking from the bottle in nightclubs, etc., became less. So some of the stronger ciders really sort of filled that in the on-trade.
Are you also talking about for that generation? Because classically, a younger person likes the more sweet. So is that also part of the designer style that you're talking about there?
I think if we go back before 1980, cider was very much a local thing, and Somerset has always been cider capital, if you like. But if we looked at sort of how the cider market was across the country, cider was made on relatively small scale, and some pubs in the on-trade kept ciders and some didn't. Most were licensed to sell ciders, and the quality of cider of different areas varied considerably. And some of the cider characters, if you like, particularly the differences between sort of East Coast and West Coast ciders, were not always to everybody's palate. And I think as the market has progressed, cider quality has increased considerably. I always think that even since the 80s, when I've been judging competitions, maybe back 1980s, you would be able to go through the ciders and decide very quickly, which ones were coming to the top. These days, I must admit, cider judging is very difficult because all the ciders are very good, and to try and pick the best one is a very difficult and sometimes a little bit subjective. So cider judging now is much more difficult than it was in the 1980s.
Good problem to have.
And it's exactly right. And that has been driven by the market, I believe. It's because people have listened to what their customers want, and they've adapted their ciders to be that. Now, the methods for making cider really have not changed. Take apples, extract the juice from them, ferment that juice, and you make your apple cider. What has changed is the level of technology and the level of skill and know-how that goes into that. I would say the majority of cider makers still use a traditional process. I think what changed in line with sort of market demands was the ability to produce cider in volumes and to be able to produce cider that could be transported around the country and had a reason around the world and had a reasonable shelf life. So if we look at the packaging of ciders over the even what's relatively short period that I've been involved with it, that's changed considerably. Things like polythene barrels have disappeared, wooden barrels have disappeared, all of which were quite problematic to clean, and the shelf life of the cider in those packages. So these days, people are looking to make consistent ciders, and that doesn't mean they have to taste exactly the same every time. But it does mean they have to be consistently good. And that is part of all cider makers' goal, if you like, is to make a consistently good product. Similar to wine making, I guess, you will always get a vintage indifference, and that's going to go, no matter how you make your cider, that depends on the year, the harvest, etc. And you're going to get subtle changes. You're always going to get subtle changes in weather, etc. We're going to make differences to the each year's cider production, and we all suffer from that. At least the cider makers like ourselves that are orchard to glass. The majority of cider makers, and particularly ourselves, the Showering Cider Mill, have orchards which are contracted to them and fruit is grown for them. And growing cider fruit in Somerset and in the whole of the UK is a very specialist part. So you have cider makers, and you have cider orchard growers, and they are skilled people, and obviously, we as cider makers work very closely with our orchard.
Is that part of your job, to go out to the orchard and say these fruits are ready, or are you at this stage of the game where you are reliant upon the orchards that you probably have had a very long-term relationship with, that they call you up and say, okay, Mr. Cork, these are ready to roll, we're going to be shipping them to you? How does that work?
That is, it's certainly part of what I do.
Okay.
And the orchards that we deal with, and the ones that particularly are our main orchard, which is only about 8 miles away from the mill here,
yeah.
so very short distance. It's about 150 acres of orchard. That's not our only orchard, but that's one of the main ones we take it from. And it's also the main orchard for the fruit for the triple vintage. I visit that orchard quite regularly because, one, it's a lovely place to visit, and two, Bob Wadey, who is our expert grower and orchard guru, is a very, very interesting person to speak to. It gives me a lot of knowledge about. Oh my
goodness, it sounds like the next person I want to talk to, the orchard specialist. An orchard guru is like a high title. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Well, the orchards that we take the fruit specifically for triple vintage from are award-winning. He's got gold medals in the past for his orchard. He's contracted to the Showering Cider Mill for the next 15 years. What we have to remember about cider is the tender love and care that goes into making any cider starts right back with when you plant those seedlings to grow your fruit.
Are those high-density orchards?
They're classed as bush orchards.
Okay.
They are higher density than what used to be the old standard orchards.
Sure.
They first started planting those type of orchards about 35 years ago. Some experimental ones were done before that, the majority of them. So most of them are coming up to their sort of 40th birthdays from growth. So they're in full production. They're very good. Wadey has a standard orchard as well as bush orchards. But the control on the fruit, the quality of the fruit, is something that is under his constant eye.
He's like the shepherd of the orchard.
He's the orchard shepherd. Yeah. Also, like most cider apple orchards in the UK, a lot of work is put into the biodiversity of that. So, orchards are very good for wildlife, and using natural predators to remove some of the more problematic bugs is very much a balance that nearly all UK orchards, and particularly Bob is very keen on.
That's his role.
Yeah. His hobby is bird watching, so you can imagine.
He's going to make that doable. Yeah, for the birds to come in. Our orchards here in this area, do they get certified organic? Is that part of the process? Or I mean, sometimes organic, it's the level of pesticides used on the products and stuff.
There are very few orchards that are certified organic by the Soil Association. In my opinion, cider apple production doesn't really fit with the sort of organic side of it, because cider apples were interested in what they taste like and what they produce. The aesthetics of what they actually look like
doesn't matter.
They're beautiful things in their own right.
Ugly apples work,
but they are not always the shiny apples that you see on the supermarket shelf. So therefore, they don't need anywhere near the amount of herbicides, etc. that a domestic eating apple will. So, in general, pesticides, etc., are not a problem for us because they're not used. So therefore, cider apple orchards have more or less been organic for all their life.
It's just the way. You don't really think about it. You're just practicing that schedule as it is.
Because you don't need to apply some of the things and also using natural pest management.
Integrated pest management.
And of course, the other skill of the orchard inside is the skill of the beekeepers. The bees are very, very important to orchards.
They sure are.
I usually visit the orchards a couple of times during the year. And then what I'm looking for specifically is to have the apples harvested and into our cider mill when they're absolutely peak, when they're in their prime. Right. So, they're fully ripe, they're fully developed, the sugar content's there, but also the tannins develop nicely. They're in good condition for pressing, so they press nicely, good juice extraction, etc. And that is where I get involved in selecting the apples for the triple vintages.
Well, let's talk a little bit about triple vintage blend. It must have been really exciting when you heard that the Charlings wanted to make a cider like that, because what you are having here is a little bit different. What the mill has been producing, the Brothers brand, is a different style of cider, what I would kind of classify it as a modern style of cider. But the triple vintage is totally different, because it is that really traditional style of cider making. Is that true, or what? Was that like, oh my goodness, they're going this direction?
What was, I think, different is we are making a product based wholly on quality. The cost of making triple vintage
is more. It's
something that we live with. You may not do it if you were looking for a high commercial return on it. So we're making triple vintage mainly because we can. We've got, we've got over 300 years of cider making skills based on this site. So we know how to make cider, and we can make every type of cider, including high quality single vintage reserves, etc. We know all about that. We have the equipment to do it, and the other thing is we have the best equipment to do it. So therefore you can take the traditional methods, and as we've gone through the years designing this site and modifying this site, we've had a central vein going through it that said we would always use the traditional methods. We would always want to use our own apples. We wouldn't want to bring any apple juice in from elsewhere. The best ciders, the type of juice, the type of apples that go into it, and that's very, very important. The second factor is the type of yeast that it ferments with. And thirdly, but not lastly, is how you control the temperature of those fermentations. Those three, particularly the control in the temperature of fermentation, are things that technology have allowed us to control more precisely. And by actually planting orchards that give you the right varieties at the right time and at the right quality is very important. But you have to think about it sort of 10 years before you're actually going to make the product.
Is that how the triple vintage was 10 years before? Like, what was the aha moment for the Charlings came back on site here in 2016. When was the planning for the triple vintage coming about? Was it straight out the gate?
And 2016, I suppose we started to look at it probably 2017, 2018.
2017, because that's you had a vintage from the 2017 in that first triple vintage.
We do a vintage. We don't always use the vintages every year.
Okay.
And because basically we are the idea of using a triple vintage is to use three good vintages. We already had the varieties planted that we would choose
for
to make that product.
Right. Now, Nick had mentioned that if you had your way, you would be making more of these kind of styles, and that puts music to my ears. Is that true? Description of you? Was it like when they finally said we're going to do this, and it was definitely a shift from the more modern style? Was there a little Bob going, "I'm back, baby Sheb, I'm back"?
No,
Here we go.
I think
it is for me. I'll say I was like, "Go, yeah, you go!" Like that. What a perfect moment to seize.
I've been very instrumental in producing modern ciders.
Yeah.
And over the sort of 40 years, the ciders we've produced have been traditional, modern. We've made vintages, etc. In the past. So I say this site, we have the full skill set to do anything from scale to craft, and the craftsmanship that's available. Not only as a cider maker, there's another 2 cider makers coming along as younger people, and they're very interested as well. So my objective is really, hopefully one day I will retire leaving everything I know about cider to somebody else, which is what I want to do. But from the point of view of making more styles like the triple vintage, the triple vintage is really a combination of looking at all the sort of craft techniques that we know that we're good at here and bringing those together and producing a cider which is worthy of being presented in any form, anywhere. It is designed not to be a drink of volume. It is quite high strength. As you know, it's a 6.8, between 6.5 and 7. It is where you achieve, with good quality, full sugar, bittersweet apples as a straight fermentation, because our triple vintage fermentations are 100% cider apples. They're a combination of bittersweets and some bittersharps, because obviously we want that little bit of acidity in there. So we blend bittersharp apples together. The acidity is naturally occurring by adding bittersharp apples. The bittersweet and the tannin levels are there because of the apples. We don't add any adjuncts to that.
No adjuncts, no concentrate. You have this legacy mill, you have this legacy family, you have a legacy cider maker sitting in front of me. Obviously, Babycham is related to that, but we've seen where sometimes it's hard for a legacy brand that's been moving in one direction to introduce another product. And, Woodchuck is a good example of that when they had the Vermont Cider Company, right? A different kind of format, a different kind of brand there that I'm familiar with in the U.S., introducing that, and it didn't quite roll over in the same way that I think they had hoped for. So is that difficult to bring out now a specific style of cider that hasn't really been part of the fabric more recently for the mill?
I think it would be for a lot of cider makers.
Okay.
I think for showerings, I wouldn't say it was easy because it was a long process. But what you have to be able to do is make that commitment. And it was over sort of about 5 years we were developing the project. We started off knowing we could, and we knew what we were trying to achieve, which is an important part, in anybody's journey.
If you have that, that's all
you actually know
that's
what you're trying to get to. So from that perspective, easy would be the wrong word, but if you're passionate enough about what you want to do, it was achievable.
That must have made you smile. I could see you smiling a little bit right now.
That takes away.
That's incredible.
A big chunk. But not all cider makers will be.
It's a luxury to have. For
it's
sure.
a luxury to have, and it's something that Of course, at the end of the day, it does also highlight the true costs involved in cider making itself. But as I say, we took away the constraints of that.
Took away let go of the reins.
What would we do if we really wanted to make this? And
it was the right choice.
Say from this comment, we would make more in that style. I think the style is very much a Somerset and West Coast, if you like, ciders. In principle, west of England make their ciders with a cidery taste. They make them out of bittersweet apples, bittersharps, whereby if you move over onto the East Coast, and obviously there are anomalies on both sides, you move over to the East Coast, they're more made from slightly lighter, less full-bodied domestic eating and cooking apples, or apples, as you say.
So just to bring folks up to snuff here, You have 3 different vintages. The first one was 2017, 2018, and I believe 2019, the first triple vintage, if I'm correct on that.
Yeah.
And then you have a more recent one, and that's when I was able to taste. And I think it's 2021, 23.
Mm-hmm.
They are used with a cultured yeast, and it's not Solera where you're adding onto. You're blending in and making.
Let's jump back to the yeast. We allow an amount of wild yeast fermentation, but we dominate it with a cultured yeast, and that is very specific to what we've been doing for many, many years here. Mm-hmm. We want that cultured yeast character to the cider, but we allow a small amount of fermentation to take place on natural yeast to bring out some of those more profound flavours that are associated with cider. Yeah. We don't want those to dominate, mainly because virtually we know all our cider connoisseurs, and certainly when you're judging, a lot of those flavours that come from the wild yeast are considered not to be that pleasant, and bringing through the cultured yeast, so that we get full advantage, and we very precisely ferment it at quite a low temperature. I think this is probably, an area where cider makers will always discuss at length the benefits of long fermentation versus short fermentation, etc. My personal view,
please,
and alongside
that's why we're here.
I like, in my mind, fermentation should be vigorous and healthy, and the yeast should be given every opportunity to perform its function in the most healthy way. So it's like a very well-tuned car. It needs to sit in the right temperature. It needs to sit in the right media it needs an amount of oxygen to replicate itself. It needs to have a period of time post that phase to do its job of converting to alcohol, and that's the time it needs, and providing the perfect conditions for that to happen in, the yeast then dictate themselves the fermentation time of how long they take to convert that sugar. But if you give them the happiest environment, they do the best job.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's my view. Very often a long fermentation is because the yeast gets too hot, dies, and then comes back. So the important bit is to keep your yeast absolutely happy throughout the fermentation period.
I don't think anyone would argue with that.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, so you have that vigorous fermentation, the primary, and then the conditioning is a length of time there.
Okay, yeah.
So that's a little bit different.
Yeah, so you get that fermentation done by a nice vigorous fermentation. I'm sure a lot of your listeners will know. But that maturation is different. And exactly how you mature your products is something that, that is the period of time, and that is when probably the most tender loving care goes into it. So every 6 weeks or so you're tasting it, deciding how it's maturing,
watching the temperature,
not exactly, keeping it in thing, but the skill is to make sure it's maturing in the right way rather than going off, as it were. So we're looking for the aging process there. Yeah. We're looking for limited amount of natural malolactic.
Okay.
We don't seed it at all for malolactic, so that traditional sort of one barreling process is not applicable. But we do like the small amount of malolactic to be there, softening the acids, and also just that rounding off of the tannins, so that the tannins become a nice, soft,
smooth experience,
flowing, and the balance. We normally talk of, sugar and acidity balance, but it's a balance between the sweetness, the tannins, and that whole flow of the flavour. On the palate, what we don't like is bumps. You don't like to be saying, oh, that's sweet. Oh, no, it's not. It's actually acidic. Oh, no, it's not.
That consistency.
You want that nice flow across the palate where the sweetness, acidity, the flavouring, the tannins, and the overall character and flavour just flow onto the palate rather than, being in a
alarming state. Yeah.
And that is the art of the maturation. And that is where the true triple vintage comes in, because they all mature slightly differently. And what it means when we come to blend and look at the different vintages, we can put what we exactly want together.
When you are holding one vintage from one year to the next, is that kind of a scary period of time there? This is kind of like Willy Wonka's ship of cider right here that I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that everybody's wearing little hats and, I mean, seriously, this is kind of like a playground for a cider maker to have the amount of, I haven't seen the site yet, but I could just imagine the laboratory, the ability, the knowledge, the wealth of knowledge. Is there any particular things you do to kind of just sit on that one vintage until you're going to, like the 2017 going to the 2019 or 21 to 2023?
Well,
it's just held in stainless steel tanks, or
we hold them in stainless steel tanks.
And it just, my sense with the triple vintage coming out is that there's a shift. You're not going to be leaving behind what is currently happening. But there must have been something in the market that said, hey, let's do this. Not being benevolent, saying, we don't care how much money it costs. It must have been something that I have a sense that maybe, Bob, you noticed in your work outside of the showering world as a consultant, that like, oh my goodness, look, cider is going up here. Like, it's pretty obvious.
I think,
and the palate is changing too.
Obviously, you've met today 2 generations who are here.
Yeah, and they're different kind of generations. As soon as I spoke to James, it was, right? He opened up his phone and said, I can follow that. That is the generation that's kind of following behind. That's much more aware of the social media and the international level of communication that's happening in the cider world. The younger generation is much more aware of that. The social implications of cider drinking, the health factors of it. I could say that as a non-commercial cider maker, it being a healthier. I said this to Nick, it's kind of like, cider's sexy again. It's like, it's kind of lifting up to be a very elevated drink.
Yes. Yeah, in my opinion, all ciders are wonderful. Some are more wonderful than others. And we're looking to produce at the top end of the market with triple vintage, as you can see. But there is a place for all ciders within the cider industry.
Certainly.
And the only way that cider will build and grow is by taking notice of the market, the consumer.
And you must have noticed that we have a brand new consumer than you did in the 1980s or the 1990s or 2000s.
Ciders has had different fortunes at different times, but they've always been a positive step forward. Obviously, with the higher end ciders, like the triple vintage, then, we put a lot of thought.
It's a beautiful packaging.
It's
really beautiful
wonderful packaging, and Matthew and the Sharons have done absolutely wonderful job of that, I think.
It's
but the actual size serve was looked at for some time. It is 375. It's a half bottle based on wine, which is a nice size serve. People often say to me, what's your best pairing with food for the Sharon's triple vintage? In my mind, there's not many foods I wouldn't drink it with. Food tastes better, in my mind, after the cider. The cider has a nice taste in its own right, but it also has the effect of enhancing the food on the palate. It
certainly does, yes. That's one of my favorite parts of doing this work, is to have people discover how well cider pairs with food and really brings the experience to another level. A Perry? Is there a possibility of a Perry? Here's a legacy family with Baby Sham, drink that turned the market. I don't know what you could let out of the hat here, Mr. Cork. But,
I'm not going to let anything out of
his
the
face
hat.
has totally changed, everybody. I could see it's like, wait a minute, where are you going with this, Rhea?
Yeah.
So, but, Nick kind of mentioned that a little bit, that maybe that could be a possible, like a one-off shot for a cider and one perry. That's kind of the possibilities there.
There's actually no reason, and I'm not saying this is anything that is on the card, so I'm not letting anything out in the hat, is that one of the vintages could be a perry.
Oh.
So, if we wanted to go down. So, that is, we've probably made more perry on this site than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
We do take pears in and we press them on this site, and that's quite unusual. There's not that many perries.
And you're using the same presses, or do you have like a dedicated area for the pears versus the
We use the same presses. Okay. The pears tend to come in at a different time, so we're usually only pressing pears when we're pressing pears.
Perry pears?
We have pressed perry pears, but we have the ability to press all English pears.
Okay.
The full range of English pears. Yeah. Again, some of the pear bases that we've reduced on are not designed for traditional pears.
Right.
But we do have.
So you have the potential.
Pears are more difficult to deal with.
Of course they are, but I mean, from the land of baby sham, I mean, anything's possible.
Simply because they don't float.
Right, I know. Like the little rocks in the water.
Yes, I personally have pressed a lot of perry pears over the years, because my first job after I came from the small amount of engineering that I did at the beginning was to look after the milling operation. So my first step into was exactly right at the front end. Wow. So I used to run the milling operation. My sort of first supervisory management role here was looking after the pressing and then I moved on to looking after fermentation, looking after final processing, looking at
the whole 9 yards.
So I was responsible for the entire site in the end.
Oh my goodness.
So,
the presses that you use, what kind of presses do you have here? Is it a particular press for the pears? Some people add some things to it to make the press a little bit more doable.
You have to be very careful that you don't over compress them, because they're very prone to producing a bowl of solid matter that you can't get the juice out of.
Right.
So you have to gently press them in comparison to
the apples.
Slightly lower pressures, slightly longer pressing times, the addition of some adjuncts to help the juice flow. The only difference I think that we do with the actual equipment is we change the knives in the milling machines.
Oh, okay. All right.
To chop the pears slightly coarser.
I see. A little coarser helps. Any advice to aspiring makers?
In my role as a consultant to the cider industry, I've worked with quite a few startup makers, and I think the first question I ask them is, are you doing this with a passion? Are you doing it for love, or are you purely doing it for a commercial return? Because the approach has to be different.
Is there another question there? Are you a trust fund baby? Right. That would be the fourth question, I would think.
It's going to take substantial investment. In the early years, like most startup businesses, the returns are not going to be as good as you may think they are. And the return on investment is difficult. The other big point not to forget, that you have to buy your raw materials very often a long time in advance from when you get paid for them. So your raw materials are only available for 3 months of the year.
Yeah.
If you're growing your own apples. If you're actually going to grow from scratch, then you've probably got a 10-year lag before you can even start as a. So the cost of entry into cider making can be quite substantial, and you need a good business plan. So cash flow is going to be a big issue for you. You've got to do it with a passion, But you've got to make sure that your passion doesn't actually bankrupt you. And that is my main piece of advice.
Well, here's one more question. If you could go back to Bob back then, what would you tell yourself?
I think what I would like to have known is the products that have made a success story over that period of time. So,
where to put your energy.
Where to put the energy, yes. Yeah. And, an awful lot of innovation in cider and different types of work on that. And there have been a number of ciders that have taken off and really grown the industry. And if you could have known those in front,
that would have been a golden ticket.
But that's every entrepreneur's
Sure.
golden wish, isn't it? Right. The other thing, I don't think I would have chosen to know too much more than that, because, changing career to cider maker, it was a leap of faith, really. And I must admit, the career advice I would give anybody is...
It takes time.
It takes time, and the top may not be where you think it is.
That's a good point.
I would say...
That's good advice.
When I was 20, I didn't realise that I'd be sat here today talking to somebody about the cider industry as a consultant and industry
expert in the field. Yeah. But here you are.
Yeah, and you make career choices for various different reasons. I consider myself very, very privileged that I managed to be with the right company at the right time and made the right choice, and that's given me a career of over 40 years that I'm reluctant to give up. I've enjoyed that work over time. I've enjoyed.
I could tell.
Particularly Shepton Mallet.
Yeah.
But I have worked all over the world cider making and packaging of ciders and other products. But in general, all my life's been cider. Spent quite a few years being responsible for overseas operations as well as the Shepton Mallet operation. So it's given me a wonderful career path.
a global experience. And had you not been fearless back 40 years ago, 38 years ago when that opportunity arose.
I'm not sure fearless.
Okay. Well,
you're always going to be apprehensive going from one...
You took a leap of faith. That's how, it's a little bit fearlessness.
And, that is something I think, if you're going to start off in any career, any industry, taking those leaps of faith is something you have to do. So my advice would be, don't necessarily not do it because the numbers don't totally add up, but make sure your expectation is not far greater than what is possible.
Keep your expectations real. Thank you so much, Bob Cork, and thank you to the Showering family for hosting me that day and also welcoming us back coming up this August for a tour of the Showering Mill in Shepton, Mallet. Make sure to go to the show notes to see a photo of Bob and the Showering brothers and some other photos. And as always, follow Cider Chat along on social media because we'll be rolling out some reels too of both the Showering Mill and the UK Cider Tour. And with that, I leave you here. This is Rhea Windcaller signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
We like cider, we like ponds, we love orchards and having fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we drink it like this. Oh yes there is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. We like cider, we like ponds, we like orchards, having some fun. There is a reason.
There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes, there is.
There is a reason why we do it like this.
Oh yes, there is.
There is a reason why we drink it like this.
Oh yes, there is.
There is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet.
Oh yeah.
We like cider.
Oh yes, we do.
We like palm.
Oh yes, we do.
We love orchards, having some fun. There is a reason. There is a reason why we do it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
There is a reason why we do it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
There is a reason why we drink it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
Ba-da-da-dum. We like walking down the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet.
Oh yeah.
We like cider.
Ba-da-da-dum.
We like palm.
Oh yes, we do.
We like orchards, having some fun.
Yeehaw!